am I a polyglot? And what is the difference between a polyglot and a hyperpolyglot? All right, to begin this session of self-reflection and assessment, I would like to first start with this question. How can we learn to use language accurately and clearly so that a successful communicative event occurs? Precision and mutual understanding being the fundamental layer we are basing our linguistic exercise upon. For me, clarity in language is one of the most important aspects of linguistic communication or interaction. I mean, if I start using words that the other person, my interlocutor, doesn't understand, or if I try to predicate any debate or discussion on words that don't clearly define for the audience, I feel like I'm creating then at that point what is normally referred to as the word salad. So, in order to begin this professionally, am I a polyglot or not? Well, let's define polyglot. Welcome to definition hell. Alright, so we're here, we're going to jump through a few dictionaries, but I think it's rather funny, bizarre in fact, that we fight polyglots and people self-identify as polyglots, and this has become an extremely commonly used word all over the place on the internet, which really leads itself to the connection of horrible scams that people try to push for money, and we all hate that. But what the heck is a polyglot? Because I think that once we define that properly, it will not only be easier to then identify those that incorrectly classify themselves as such, but it will also help us to frame those people that instead, yes, they would be correctly identified as polyglots. So if we are on Google and we write what is a polyglot, we read adjective, knowing or using several languages, noun, a person who knows and is able to use several languages. This definition is completely useless. Thank you, Google. Why is it useless? Well, first of all, the word several can be interpreted in a monumental amount of... I mean, yeah, sure, it's plural. That's the only intrinsic characteristic of this word. But if I try and look up this word, several, it says more than two, but not many. Even though this is not satisfactory, it actually kind of helps us to identify what a polyglot is not. And maybe we can sort of retro-engineer the definition. So someone who speaks one language, clearly not a polyglot. Someone who speaks two languages, not a polyglot. It has to be more than two, but not many. So the last part is useless. Not many, what does that mean? Why not many? So someone who knows 100 languages is not a polyglot? In that case, is he a hyperpolyglot? I mean, it becomes a little problematic, but at least we have identified it to be a polyglot, at least 3. But is that it? No, sir. Let's jump into Merriam-Webster to try and find a more satisfactory answer. Polyglot, speaking or writing several languages, multilingual. Unfortunately, the adjectival usage is the same, speaking or writing several languages. As we have just identified, several doesn't really help us to pinpoint the number of languages and the level at which these are being used, because it is my opinion that unless we expect a certain level that is at least relatively high, then this word's meaning becomes diluted. Because if you can be A1 in 5 languages, so many people could become polyglots, it would be completely useless as a word. And therefore, to be able to use a language is once again a failure within the definitional realm, because what does it mean to use it? At what level? Conversational? Fluency, professional level, business level, Cambridge Dictionary, polyglot, speaking or using several different languages. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Vocabulary.com, a person who speaks more than one language. Note how dictionary.com actually gives us a different interpretation, which makes it in fact even less impressive. So by this interpretation from dictionary.com, that I reject by the way, if you speak 2 languages, you're already a polyglot, and it appears regardless of your level. Could you add your own language to reach this, like your own native language, or are we only talking about foreign language acquisition at this point? Because I mean, as someone who was born in Sicily and speaks since birth both Italian and Sicilian, then I would be a polyglot automatically. No. Continuing our adventure, what do we get on dictionary.com? A polyglot, able to speak or write several languages, multilingual. I personally find it interesting that now we see the addition of the ability to write in these languages, but that's the only difference. On the website called Rosetta Stone, we have an interesting definition of where they take this definition of what makes them an authority. I mean, it is what it is, but I think it is more interesting if we have to look at this and try to come up with something as a community than what we have found up to this point in the dictionaries. They ask, what is a polyglot? Learn all about these language lovers or frauds. Now, it's not long, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out, but I do want to focus on this part. How many languages do you need to speak to be a polyglot? First, I find it interesting that they focus on the idea of being able to speak, and I agree with that. I do not believe that someone who only writes and reads a language should be considered a polyglot. I think there should be a strong connection or relevance to the ability to speak and possibly speak fluently. Although when it comes to the definition of fluency, I will have to dedicate a section of this video to that towards the end. Here they say, before reaching polyglot status, you may become monolingual, fluent in one language, bilingual, fluent in 2 languages, trilingual, fluent in 3 languages, multilingual, fluent in 3 or more languages, polyglot, fluent in 5 or more languages. Now, considering the fact that we are starting from monolingual, and as they underline here, saying that your native language does count as your first language, yes, a lot of people are monolingual. They only know their own first language. This is a category that I think is extremely descriptive and very clear. Same for bilingual or trilingual, because we have a number here. But apart from the number, usually you call someone who's bilingual who is either native